Welcome back to Boilers Extra. I'm Nathan Baird from the Indy Star.
Sam King from the Journal and Courier.
We are from Mackey Arena tonight. Just got done watching Purdue men's basketball's first official practice of the season. Obviously, they've been going all summer, but this is the first official day on the NCAA calendar. Just got done talking to Matt Painter and several players after practice. And this is the football bye week, so I thought it was a good week to just kind of put football aside. And we're just going to go basketball heavy today and talk about what we saw and what we heard from these players at practice today. And I think the first thing that jumps out to me is, something that we knew was coming, but just like the overall depth of this team. Matt Painter on the Field of 68 podcast last week said something about our second five is a national tournament team, or it would make the NCAA tournament. And as opposed to last year, where they were putting, Braden and Trey and Fletcher on the same team and kind of forcing the opposing team to rise to that level. You've got two pretty equally matched teams that they could put together on any given day, and you saw it, I thought, in the competitiveness of this practice.
Yeah, they got after it, and I think this is something that will benefit Purdue throughout the course of the season, because there's going to be times where Purdue will play better competition during its practice in preparation for the opponent than the actual opponent in the game. And that's one of the things I was talking to Trey Kaufman-Wren just a few moments ago, and I said, how can that help you that you're going to see that level of competition in practice before you even get to the games? And he said last year Purdue played Auburn. People remember it was in Birmingham at a semi-neutral site. It was a lot of Auburn fans, but Purdue was shellacked in that game. And Trey Kaufman-Wren said, I don't think we were ready for it. That was something we hadn't seen. And you go in there and you get kind of blindsided by it, and the score indicated as much. That may not be the case this year, because you can basically simulate whatever level of competition you're going to see on any given day with mixing and matching different lineups and teams on the floor.
Yeah, and just everybody on the court on a given rep, especially when they're doing those competitive drills. So today they split into black versus gold. I have the teams, and I have it with me, and I forgot to bring it out. But it was, I think they split them up throughout the summer, obviously. And you could go black against gold, and every spot you can say, maybe with the exception of I don't know that they have someone who really can push Trey, although we'll talk about that a little bit as to what's going on at the 4. But Jacobson against Clough, Smith against Meyer, all the guys that are at the 2 and the 3 right now. They all kind of, to some extent, you've got some equalization that goes on there, and it makes every practice a lot more physical, a lot more competitive. And you've heard that behind the scenes and seen it now with our own eyes again today.
Yeah, and so it's funny because we came in here, and one of the things we were told was you can shoot video of this practice except for the competitive drills. And some people had asked, well, how will we know when that is? And we were told, you will know. And you certainly did. You could tell when the level ramped up when they were doing the scrimmage type situations and things that were, there seemed to be something on the line. That is, kind of a great sign that this is, again, this was not the first practice. It's just, by the NCAA standards, the first official practice. But they're still a long way away from that exhibition game against Kentucky, and you're already seeing kind of this level of competition and this competitive desire, nature, and you're going to have to see that because there are guys right now who are fighting for minutes who were valuable players a year ago at other schools or at Purdue who aren't going to have the same roles and the same number of minutes this year because there's just so many good players on this roster.
I mean, one question that we often get, I think we should just transition to this now, I guess, but the question that we'll often get from people is well, who are they going to have to redshirt somebody, and who is going to redshirt? And I think that anybody who isn't a known starter and who hasn't used a red shirt yet, maybe that question has to be on the table because they just can't play all these guys. Right. You're not going to play 12 guys. You're probably not even going to play 10. And there might have to be at some point on this roster somebody who in many other years would be a significant part of the team, but there just are not minutes for that person.
Right.
It's not a matter of spots. It's a matter of the minutes that you can actually spread around. And Braden Smith, even if Omer Meyer is going to play a lot of one or someone to give him a break, he's not coming out of the game. Like he's still playing 40 minutes. So right away you're down to just the other 160 minutes, the other 4 spots. Now how do you split those up between 11 people or whatever? It's just not feasible.
Right, and I don't want to speculate on who will redshirt, but there are guys during the course of just this first practice, and we'd seen them go through some stuff earlier this summer. But for example, Antoine West one time makes a runner, and I'm like, man, he's really good. And you're thinking, but how much can he play? And you start looking at the other guys and what they can do, and it's going to be interesting to see coming out of that Kentucky exhibition how Matt Painter decides that he wants to approach this season, because make no mistake, the ultimate goal for this team is to win a national championship, and that's why Liam Murphy's here. That's why Oscar Clough is here. That's why these pieces are in place, because that was perceived weaknesses that Purdue had to fill in order to get there. So there's going to be a lot of soul searching here, I guess, in the couple weeks leading up to the start of the season, with what Purdue wants to and has to do to use this lineup to get to that ultimate goal.
It's a little bit different than what they would have been facing last year, where and Jack Benner, I talked to him extensively tonight for something I'm going to write for IndyStar.com here in the coming week or so. I think very early on they saw, he got sick over the summer, and he was just a little bit behind from that standpoint. He's making the transition from smaller to bigger, small school to Big Ten. Like, there was a lot of reasons why it made sense to redshirt him. And with Riley Burgess, it was kind of a back and forth thing. Like, he was right on the cusp, but he had played so well over the summer that it then became a thing of like, well, when you look at some of the other personnel, could he push Caleb First enough that where he'd have to play a lot of minutes, or someone else, right? Like, would something else happen? Would Trey Coughlin-Wren have to play a lot of 5, and then Burgess made sense of 4? Like, I think they got caught in a place where it's like the upside and the downside were both kind of evening out. Here, I think it's just going to be a matter of either there's minutes or there's not. They're just so deep at both the front court and the back court. And so I think, just like with any year, I think it almost has to happen a little bit organically, because the other thing that has to happen, if you're going to play more guys, if you're going to try to play 10 guys, that also sort of has to happen organically. I don't think Matt Painter can go into games and say, like, well, I've got to play 10 guys. That's like the first thing on my plate, and then we'll figure out how to win the game from there. That can't be the way the math works. So that's still a ways away, but it's going to be a thing that's in the background of everything leading up to the start of this season.
Yeah, and as far as who may start, who may finish games, that's all going to be determined over the course of the season. I don't think that, I'm sure the coaching staff has some sort of idea of what they think it's going to be, but that can change so much, and the dynamic can change so much. And it really starts with the big men. We mentioned Oscar Clough. Daniel Jacobson was a starter last year for 2 games, I guess. 1 minute into the second game of the season, breaks his leg, and it changed the whole course of the rest of the season and how Purdue had to approach it. But there's a lot more flexibility. But just when you talk about Jacobson and Clough and Trey Coughlin-Wren, there is a lot of different things that Purdue can do with those 3 guys. Trey Coughlin-Wren's experience at the 4, he's experience at the 5. We see a lot of what were short hook shots for Trey Coughlin-Wren last year that are now dump-offs for alley-oops, just in the couple times we've seen them practice. There's a lot of different tweaks and things you can do because you have those 3 guys right there in those 4 and 5 spots.
Yeah, and this is an unfair way to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Last year, especially after Daniel Jacobson got hurt, this team still had versatility. That team had versatility, but it was almost like, what are you willing to put up with to play a bigger lineup? And what are you willing to put up with to play a smaller lineup? And with this collection of players, it does really start to look more like whatever a team is most vulnerable, Purdue can rearrange its pieces and attack it that way. I don't know how much they'll play small lineups, which would involve putting Trey Coughlin-Wren at the 5, and then presumably Jack Benner, who is, as Matt Painter said tonight, he's a big guard, but he's played a lot of 4. I guess he's kind of like Cam Heide in that way, although he's not quite as tall as Cam Heide was. And they don't have a lot of like other options at the 4 besides Trakoff and Wren, but I could see them still using that in a pinch if they had to, or if it just for whatever reason it really matched up very well against a certain opponent, or you have foul trouble with the other 2 big men. But it just the versatility this year seems to be more from a point of strength than from a point of weakness. Isn't really the right term, but of having to kind of make that what are you giving up in order to do it?
Yeah, and Daniel Jacobson is 7'4". He's a very tall human for those of us who have stood next to him. But he has the ability to come out and play out of the paint. He's got a nice jump shot. He can guard on the perimeter a little bit, I think. So that could be a situation where I don't know if they'll ever play him at the 4. I didn't kind of go into that. That's probably something we'll learn down the road. But it's an option. It's something that you could possibly do depending on what kind of team you're facing or whatever it is. It's definitely probably one of the more intriguing things is just how Purdue uses this lineup and having, it's a great luxury to have all these guys, but then you have to use them, correctly, I guess, depending on what you're up against to maximize what you have.
We got a question from one of our readers named Aaron, who was asking who's going to start at the 2. I think it seems like that's the only position that isn't locked in. And I think we'll get to the 2 in a second. But he kind of laid out the starting 5 other than the 2 being Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer, Trakoff and Wren, and then Jacobson at the 5. I don't know that is how I would assume it's going to be. I mean, Oscar Clough came here for a reason. What Oscar Clough gives Purdue as a rebounder, I think, is more advanced than where Daniel Jacobson is as a rebounder right now. And as much as they want the rim protection and need the rim protection, they might lean towards that big rebounding body in there. Not that he can't do other things too, but that would be, as I'm sitting here today, that's maybe my assumption is the first 5 on the floor, just because Matt Painter has really harped on rebounding. Yes, they need rim protection. They suffered from a lack of rim protection last year, but it's not like Oscar Clough's a 0 with that, and he can give you what was last year as good of rebounding as anybody was doing in college basketball almost.
Yeah, I would say that's probably the route that I think Purdue will take, is starting Oscar Clough at least initially at the 5. But there's a difference between being a starter and then the guy who plays the most minutes in the role, and that might change every single night. Just depending on what you're up against or foul trouble or whatever. But it's definitely, going back to the question, who starts at the 2, it's a nice thing for Purdue that there are options. You have C.J. Cox, who played a lot of minutes last year. Jakari Harris began the season as a starter last year and, kind of struggled to find his stroke early and then lost his minutes, but he came back and was a really good shooter for this team down the stretch and played a lot of minutes. How Purdue decides to use Braden Smith, where he's not going to play the point guard the entire game. Omer is going to play some of the 1. He can play some of the 2. It's going to be interesting for sure. But as far as who's the starter, I don't know that that's that important right now. And it's probably something that may not even be known midway through the season. Probably when you get to that start after the Christmas break, when you go into there, you may see a more solidified starting rotation or rotations coming off the bench.
Well, it is with the 5. I think it's also like, what do you need at the end of the game? Do you need the rim protection or do you need the rebounding? Like they can make that sort of decision there. As far as with the 2, I mean, I guess sitting here right now, I would assume Omer Meyer is their starting 2, but they've got, that means that somebody who last year was starting quality for a team that really almost made the Elite 8, almost beat the team that then almost won the national championship, is coming off the bench. And I think what makes it hard is, again, it's not really the spots, it's the minutes. I think that's what's going to be a more interesting thing to keep an eye on. Like, not who's starting, but who is even getting minutes and how those get spread around. But it's a good problem to have. Matt Painter right now, as you said before, like, every year you're trying to win a national championship. You endeavor to win a national championship. But there are times in a program's life where that's more realistic than others, obviously. And for Purdue right now, you know, what was it? Matt Painter said you used the phrase with that Field of 68 interview where it was like you don't know how many more bites at the apple you're going to get or something like that when you're leaving the court at the end of losing to UConn. And here it is 2 years later where they have this loaded roster and they have every reason to feel like it's something that's very within their reach. So his first responsibility is to do everything possible to do that. And then your number two responsibility is being fair to everybody or whatever. But I feel like that's a distant second in terms of priorities.
No, if you're worried about what guys are feeling throughout the course of this, listen, there were guys last year who were not happy with their minutes, I assure you. There were guys 2 years ago who weren't happy with their minutes. And 2 years ago, a lot of those guys sacrificed it and did it for the betterment of the team because they knew that was what gave the team the best shot to win a national championship. Last year, it became pretty apparent, I think, some point in the middle of the year. I think Purdue lost 4 or 5. They're like, this team is probably a year away from being that caliber of team again. And then I think, to the coaching staff's credit and to the players' credit, that team really peaked in the tournament at the end of the year. And that's something that I said to Fletcher Lawyer, and he's like, yeah, that was kind of like we were at our best when that season ended. So then you sit there the whole summer and say we were that close and now we have this team. And I think that for the guys that transferred here, they came here because they thought I can help this team win a national championship. And one thing that Matt Painter has always been with every player that he recruits and transfers and whatnot, I think he's brutally honest. He will tell you, listen, I'm not guaranteeing you playing time. I'm not guaranteeing you anything. There's been rare exceptions, as there are with anybody, with any program. But he says, you're going to have an opportunity here, and you have to go out and earn it. And he even kind of alluded to that today when he was talking about, like, a guy who knows he's going to get 3 or 4 minutes at the end of each half has to go in there with the mindset of, how can I maximize these minutes? How can I make myself the most efficient player over these 4 minutes versus going in there and saying, like, well, I'm only getting 4 minutes here. If I got more of an opportunity, I'd be able to showcase more what I can do. And this team just seems to understand where it is and what it's got an opportunity to accomplish this year, and is taking a very mature and professional approach, at least entering the season, to what's on the table here.
I think if I was a coach, the way I would try to competitively sell it to my guys is like, okay, it would be an outlandish statement to say we have the best backup at every position in the country. That's a very different thing than saying you have the best starter at every position in the country, because that would be a much harder thing to do. But, like, we have the best backup at every position in the country. It's an outlandish thing to say, and it may not even be true, but what are you guys going to do to try and prove that? Like, what are you going to do to try and prove that we have the best 40 minutes of foreplay in the country, and that's a bad choice of words. Play at the 4, the best 40 minutes of two guard in the country, best 40 minutes of point guard. Braden Smith will often do that on his own, obviously, but you know what I'm saying. Like, I feel like that's how I would sell it if I was a coach. Let's talk about what we saw today that was impressive. Or things not impressive, but just anything that stood out to us. I want to start with Jack Benter because he was someone that was very out of sight, out of mind last year, taking that redshirt season. We've heard all along that what he'd been doing to, like, impress people, and there were flashes of it today where there was a sequence where he got in the lane and then, like, kicked out a no-look pass to Antoine West for a 3, and then he came down and put up his own 3, and he got, like, bashed in the face at one point and had to leave practice. But he's getting in there and scrapping, and when they had, Oscar Clough wasn't here yet because of his visa problems, and Daniel Jacobson was overseas playing. They didn't have any big men, so when they had practices,
Raleigh Burgess was coming back.
From his surgery, right? So Traycon Vermin is playing the 5 again, and that made Jack Benter a 4, and that's not what he is, but it is his path to minutes on this team this season. I think is to be him and Liam Murphy, but I think he probably has an edge on Murphy in some ways in terms of his all around game, and it's almost more whatever he gives you this year in that spot is a benefit. It's more about, like, what are you seeing from Jack Benter and what the player he's going to be when everybody leaves after this year, and you kind of have to try to extend and keep this thing going with a bit of a new mix he could be, I think, a big part of that.
Yeah, and you didn't even talk about the play that really impressed me the most. He drove down the lane and just elevated over everyone and dunked.
Yeah,
and you're just kind of like, whoa, where did that come from?
Sequence, yeah.
And he has the capability to do that. And I think people look at him, and yes, he's a very good shooter from the outside. He can handle the ball a little bit. He is probably bigger than a lot of people would think looking at him. But, man, he's pretty athletic. And he gives you a different dynamic in that regard. He's not, Miles Colvin or Cam Heide athletic probably, but he's not far behind those guys in what he's able to do, which makes him kind of maybe a good fit for, the four and how Purdue used it, especially last year, when he can spell a guy for a few moments and give you those, like we were talking about, 3 to 4 minutes at the end of a half that you're going to need from him. Definitely was one of the highlights that I saw today. One of the things that I noted, and I'd asked Fletcher Lawyer about this at the end of my conversation with him, I said, this team looks like it has a lot of alphas. Can that be a good thing? Because, everybody wants to be the leader. And he said, I think it's a very good thing. And he said, it kind of echoed something Matt Painter said after practice. He said, this has to be a player-led team. And, if it's coaches barking at you or telling you how to do things, you're probably not going to get to the ultimate goal. And having 3 guys that started for a team that was in the Final Four 2 years ago is great. But then you add in an Oscar Clough, who's been a key player in college basketball. You add some of these other guys. Liam Murphy was a high-volume outside shooter and a guy who scored a lot at college. You add that. That's a great thing. And the biggest thing is, and Fletcher Lawyer said this, is it's great to have a lot of leaders, but we have to communicate and we have to listen to each other. And when we do that, then there's no ceiling to what this team can accomplish.
Antoine West, another guy who is new, and when you're coming in from the outside as a true freshman to a place that already has 2 starting guards who've been here, this will be their 4th year. Then you've got the 2 guys who were freshmen last year who played big roles, and then you bring Omer Meyer in on top of all that. So where does Antoine West fit in? But he looks very much a part of everything that's going on. Like, he does not look behind at all. He looks like he came in as a true freshman, ready to make an impact. And everything we've heard is that he's been playing really well all summer. And it's another one of those things where, like, put a pin in whatever it means for this coming season, because what it means for this season is adding to that sort of competitive mix and how much better this team can get with every practice because of that, because they go so deep with so much talent. And then what does it mean for when someone is in, like, handing off to him a year from now?
Yeah, it's a guy with, I think Purdue has plans for him down the road. Whatever role he has this year, if he has a role, at least in games, maybe limited. But when you build a program, this is what happens. When you build a program that's consistently top 5, top 10 team, you run into these problems. And that's a good thing as long as you, in this day and age especially, can keep them in your program and you get that long-term development. Listen, 4 years ago, Purdue was not in this situation. Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer had to start out of necessity more than based on what they had done. Now, they were really good players and proved to be worthy of starting there, but Purdue didn't have a whole lot of options that season. And now you're in a situation where those guys are seniors, and you're set up when those guys are gone. You're not feeling like you're starting over. That's the real ultimate goal when you're building a program, is you want to sustain success and have the guys that are ready to go in case of emergency, or when those guys ultimately depart and leave the program.
Anything else that jumped out to you today?
I just think there's so much to really talk about, and we will over the course of the season.
It was a 3-hour practice, so
we'll get to a lot more. But right now, and Purdue doesn't have all the problems solved today. It was one practice and very competitive. Got a lot of good stuff done. I think the thing that I really like to see watching these practices is the way that PJ Thompson kind of commands everything when he's calling the offenses, the way he explains things, and then seeing the guys listen to him, and immediately what he just told them, you see it come to fruition. That's another sign of, these guys are really good players, but you have to be coachable and, learn on the fly sometimes. And it seems like this team has done a great job, not just today, but for years. But PJ Thompson is a guy that just looks and sounds the part of a future head coach. And that's another thing where you talk about the depth of this coaching staff. With, Paul Lusk has been a head coach before. Sasha Stefanovic obviously has been a player in this program. You've got GAs who are players in this program. Terry Johnson obviously is a guy with a lot of coaching experience. That's probably an unheralded part of the depth of this team is just the coaching staff and the continuity that it has with one another.
It is interesting that PJ Thompson is, other than Matt Painter, he's the second most vocal presence at Purdue basketball practice typically. Not that the other guys can't be, but and part of it is just because of his role directing offensive things. But no, it's noticeable, and it's just interesting to watch him, because I covered him as a player, and then I went away for a while, and then I came back, and now that's what he is, and it's different to see him command that role, but it's definitely an asset for this team. Let's touch on volleyball real quick before we sign off, because we're sitting here in Mackey Arena, and there is a volleyball net across the middle of Mackey Arena. The Dave Shondel's team was in here practicing just a minute ago. They played Washington here on Thursday night, which is still just a weird thing for me to say. In
the Big Ten opener.
In the Big Ten opener, yeah. I saw a quote this week. Ryan Day was talking about they're playing at Washington in football. And he said, that's what you come to the Big Ten for. And I'm like, not until last year. But just give people an update on this team. Is 9-1 now. They have 1 loss,
ranked 10th in the country. So I saw this team. I've kind of for years, and you know this because you were here when I first came to Lafayette. I've kind of followed this volleyball program for years, and when I first got here, I went to one match, and the arena was, it's Holloway Gymnasium is small, but it was packed, and the environment was crazy. And I kind of then said, to our sports editor at the time, Jim Stafford, I said, why don't we cover this team more? And it's kind of grown this following over the course of Dave Shondel's now decades-long tenure as the head coach, to the point where you can have matches, and they do annually in Mackey Arena, and you get a great environment in a basketball arena that is known for being one of the most chaotic basketball venues in the country. And when you can get that for volleyball, then that's great. It's great for the sport. It's great for probably the program recruiting players here. But you have to be able to be successful to get that out. And just based on last year, I kind of phrased this question to Dave Shondel after their match on Sunday against IU Indianapolis. Purdue lost 4 players to the transfer portal. 2 of them were All-American players who were big-time marquee players that are now succeeding at other programs that are also in the top 10. And people thought, this program is going in the gutter.
I was going to say, just to set the stage, just a few months ago, people were things were kind of in disarray, it seemed. Probably wasn't that way on the inside, but from the outside looking in, it looked what is going on over there? Because it's not like they haven't been successful consistently. Right. So why is there's this mass exodus? And to be back in the national top 10 this quickly, I think is a testament to Dave Shondel and his staff and what they've built.
I asked him about that, and Dave Shondel was pretty blunt and said, you take it personally when those players who are, as far as NIL goes, they were taken care of comparatively to what Purdue had in the program last year and years before. So you're thinking, what do I do wrong? What did I do wrong? But if you let that linger, then you're not setting yourself up for success moving forward. And he went and looked at the portal at who was available, talked to some players. Some players reached out to him, and he said he really needed that to reaffirm, maybe it's just the nature of what college sports is right now. And he said 5 players reached out to him and saw Purdue as a tremendous opportunity for them to come in and help a team that had been successful for now 20 plus years, and wanted to maintain that success, but then also saw this as a chance for them to come in and reinvigorate their careers to some degree, or just help a team that was maybe a notch better than the ones they were playing at. And now you're sitting here, and listen, Purdue hasn't played the greatest non-conference schedule, but it did beat an SMU team that's currently ranked 11th. It did beat a Kansas team that is currently ranked 18th. Played tough with the Georgia Tech team that was ranked at the time. That's Purdue's only loss to date, and that was the 3rd match of the season. Purdue went to Nashville and beat Tennessee, and what I imagine was very pro-Tennessee crowd. So the team has done some impressive things, especially when you consider that its key players are either players that are getting more opportunity because they're behind players who have now departed for other programs. Didn't even mention that Raven Colvin graduated and is now playing pro volleyball. Purdue's libero last year also graduated. So this was a kind of a roster makeover. And then you had Kenna Woolard, who currently leads the Big Ten in kills, as one of those players who was maybe behind Eva Hudson, Chloe Chicoine last year, now getting an opportunity. And they're like, now's my time to shine. Go out and capitalize on it. And so far, they have.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of respect for Dave Shondell because for people who don't follow volleyball that closely, like the Big Ten is the volleyball conference, like in a lot of ways. Like
even more so now that you've added some of these schools out west.
Exactly. And to even be to be in the top 10 of the Big Ten in volleyball is not easy, and to be in the national top 10 is obviously speaks for itself. And obviously those things change over the course of the season, but the consistency with which Purdue has had one of the handful of best programs in the Big Ten should not be overlooked, because it's a difficult thing to do. It's an incredibly competitive conference. You look at the Final Four every year, and there's usually multiple Big Ten teams there, or at least one.
Wisconsin and Nebraska have been dominant nationally. Penn State was dominant for a long time.
Yeah. So it's basically the opposite of basketball, where they're kind of waiting for the Big Ten breakthroughs to happen. That Big Ten leads the way in volleyball in a lot of ways. So be interesting to see where that team goes this season, and obviously where basketball goes. So we will keep bringing you storylines from basketball. We will be back kind of in a football state of mind next week. Purdue plays Illinois at home at noon. A week from Saturday, resumes things after taking this week off, and I think we'll have a lot to say about what that game means and what the month of October means for this team, because as we've been saying it since the beginning of the season, that 3-game stretch, and then frankly, after what Indiana did to Illinois last week, maybe we should be talking about it as a 4-game stretch. So for Sam King, I'm Nathan Baird. We'll talk to you again soon.